Pray with me, please. Holy and loving God, for bringing us together, we thank you for this time that we're able to spend together. And we ask that it may be your hand that reaches out and touches us, draws us close to your presence, so that we may find in you and in each other all that we need. We ask this in your many names. Amen. So, of course, today we start a month in stewardship. And I get the first one, which is the boring one. But next week, Reverend Peter will be preaching for the first time here at the village. And then the following week, Daniel Cheeseman, who is the CEO of Switchboard, will be sharing with us. And if you think that Daniel's just going to be talking about volunteering in the community, well, he was a Baptist minister. So, beware. The following week is Caroline Lucas, who's going to be talking, obviously, about stewardship on a much larger scale, on a national and global scale. And then the following week, Finola Brophy, who until recently was the chair of the Rainbow Chorus, will be coming in to speak about the spirituality found in music and about her experience of volunteering in creating community, which is what choir, of course, is all about. So, of course, it's some 49 years ago this week that Troy Perry led the very first MCC service in his living room. And right at the very beginning, MCC Church was a church that not only welcomed lesbian, gay, bi and trans people, but also, of course, affirmed them. The first same-sex blessing was in 1969, believe that, and only a few years later Troy was filing lawsuits designed to change the law to allow for same-sex marriage. Now, of course, back then, same-sex marriage was an absolute pipe dream, as was a denomination of over 250 churches. But now, of course, the work is paying dividends. And did you know that the Global Justice Institute reaches out all over the world to support LGBTQ groups? That World AIDS Day was first an MCC event before it was adopted by the United Nations. That MCC's creation of truly inclusive liturgy is unique, and we were the very first denomination to use inclusive language, long before others realised its importance, although I have to say many of them have yet to do so. The only time also that I'm aware of the World Council of Churches ever taking communion together was when MCC led a service for them and offered it. And suddenly, without realising it, all these denominations found themselves at one communion table, and up until then nobody had been able to work out how to do it. And in ignorance, we came along and set the table and just invited everyone. That's what MCC is about. And Troy's very first sermon laid the foundation for MCC when he preached a three-pronged sermon about Christian salvation, Christian community, and Christian social action. And whether or not you are a Christian, hopefully in this room you know a little bit about Christian salvation. I certainly do. When people talk to me about Christian salvation, the things that I tend to talk about are, first of all, how Jesus saved me from pretending to be straight. Because the denomination I was in basically suggested that I should live my whole life pretending to be a straight person, get married, settle down, Fortunately, I got saved from all of that. I was saved from thinking there was only one way, because MCC is a gathered church. And even though there's maybe 20 of us in this room, I can guarantee there's probably 20 different opinions on everything. So we have evangelical Christians on the one hand, and then we have spiritualists on the other. We have folk who are grounded in a very traditional, very Catholic, I'm using that word globally, sense of church dogma and church community, and on the other hand there are those who are into Celtic spirituality and are much more in tune with life and finding God in the world around them and in grounding ourselves in God, which is very much akin to Buddhism. And all of that can be found in MCC and much more. And the amazing thing that I found is that as a pastor, I found God present in each and every one of them. which then has brought me to the place where I've realised that in the Christian field there is not one way. There are lots, and that Christ is much, much bigger than we could possibly imagine. I was saved from believing that I had to have a Christian as a partner. In actual fact, one of the things that folks always ask me is, do you find it difficult living with somebody who's an atheist? And I'm like, actually no, it's much easier than living with somebody who's a Christian. And the reason for that is because as a Christian, you've got all those niggly little things that you don't agree on, all those things that you're just a little shade different on, and they niggle away. But when your partner doesn't believe in God, the arguments are pretty big. So, you know, it's not a problem at all. And I'm with the Apostle Paul. I was saved from the law. And what I mean by that is that I was brought up to believe that God loved me because of what I did. And if I did more good things, then God loved me more. If I did more right things, God accepted me more. And that's what it was all about. That's law-based Christianity. And the Apostle Paul, of course, talks about being saved from that when he says, you know, for me, there is no law, there's only what works, there's only what I find is right and helpful and building. And moving to that place from a very law-based Christianity has also been an extraordinary saving grace for me. And I believe that what Christ does is, in salvation, helps us to live fully, which is why Jesus says, I came so that you may have life and have it in abundance. I don't think Jesus was talking about what happens later, the next life. I think Jesus is talking about right now. And that what Jesus does is help us to live a full and rich life right now. And so when I talk about salvation, that's what I'm talking about. Not to negate what other people believe in terms of salvation, in terms of eternal life and the cross, but these are my personal experiences. And then, of course, Christian community. The Village MCC. What does it mean to be church? Well, of course, we have a vision. We call for a world where LGBTQ people live free from discrimination. And a vision's an odd thing, because a vision is something that you set that's kind of way in the distance, but it's something that you work towards. So, you know, do I believe that I will see LGBT discrimination ended worldwide in my lifetime? I very much doubt it, you know. However, that's what I work towards. That's the vision on the horizon. And so with other people, we work towards it. This is what Martin Luther King talked about when he talked about, you know, the arc of justice being long, the arc of history being long, but it bends towards justice. I believe it bends towards justice because we have a vision for justice, just as Martin Luther King did. And that's what's important as a church. And of course we have a mission. And our mission is, we're called primarily to empower and serve the LGBT community. Which of course answers the question, you know, why are we called here and now in this place and in this time? And it's odd because folks say, you know, well, why do you have to kind of just limit to that? Why don't you just, you know, reach out and empower everybody and serve everybody? And my answer is, because I believe this is what we're called to do. It's as simple as that. This is what God has called us to do, just as God calls other people to do other things. They're just as valid, but this is what we've been called to do as a church. And of course, all the things that we do are governed by our values, and we have a set of core values. We are a Christian church called to do justice and walk humbly with God. We seek at all times to be honest, transparent, and true to our mission in the world. And that again comes from that scripture that we had read earlier. And in that, Micah talks about justice and kindness. In fact, the scripture, that whole Micah 6 verse 8, is what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and love kindness. And I'm always amazed at how many people get that the other way around. You know, it's kind of, we love justice and we do kindness. And it's like, no. Actually, it's the other way around. You do justice. That's the way that you live. And kindness is the way that we do that and the way that we live it. And that's what Micah's talking about. And if you've not read it, pick up Micah and look at chapter 6 and look at that whole conversation between God and the nation of Israel, because the whole thing is a social critique, and in it you can find where we are today and the challenges that we have nationally and globally today, and the answers that the prophets had 3,000 years ago, and they're really not very different to the answers that I would look for today. It's odd as well that folks talk to me about the church, and you'd think that the main questions they'd ask me are things like, so can you be LGBT and Christian? Or why did you feel called to begin an LGBT? No. Actually, there are two questions that I tend to get asked now. And the first one is, there are two MCC churches in Brighton, how are they different? That's the first one. And so my answer is, MCC is a fellowship of churches, and they're all very different to each other. The Village MCC is a Christian church that's happy to identify with the LGBT community and support it. I don't know how MCC Brighton sees themselves, but I'm sure their website will have lots of information. I suggest you go and look. That's my answer. And the thing to remember is that MCC is a fellowship of churches. And so when you think about MCC as a denomination, it's not like the Anglican Church, where if you walk into one and you walk into another, you're going to find things that are in common. The reality is that if you walk into two MCCs, you're going to find two very different churches. So it's much more like the Congregationalist structure. We have a very loose set of values that we all adhere to, and we come together as a fellowship of churches. But those churches are very diverse. And again, there are no two the same. The other question I get asked is, why does Andrew Ramage wear a collar, even though he's not an ordained minister? And again, my answer is, well, in the UK, it's not against the law for anybody to wear a clergy collar. And our denomination now allows lay leaders to wear one. However, at the Village MCC, only ordained clergy wear a collar, which is myself and Reverend Peter. So this congregation is led by two ordained accountable ministers, Reverend Peter and myself. It's led by a very talented and dedicated musical director, Will. A dedicated board that includes Wendy, our pastoral team leader, who right now is stuck in France waiting for the car to be mended. And I spoke to her today. She sends her love, but she and Sarah, but they are stuck in France waiting for the car to be mended. Keith, our treasurer, yeah, he's just worth his weight in gold, seriously. And Simon, our secretary, who is not only a great secretary, but makes fabulous cakes. Thank you, Jesus. So, so a gifted board. We have an emergency team, which is Sarah and James, web designer, Chris, health and safety, Mary, hospitality, Damien, safeguarding, Sarah, refreshments, Simon, and so much more. And we do all of this on an income of less than £800 a month. Put that into context, according to the Charities Commission, the income for one church in town here, which you may be familiar with, is £16,500 a month. And the New Life Community Church, their income is about £5,500 a month. And if the name sounds familiar, it's because until recently they were the little church that met next door in St. Mary's Church Hall. Do you remember? So what we do with our church budget, I think, is nothing short of amazing. And just in case you didn't know, this is how. So first of all, my salary is £400 a month. Unfortunately, neither Reverend Peter or Will get paid anything. We spend around £160 on rent, £50 on office stuff, £50 we put towards conference costs, and we do that for every month throughout the year. £80 in assessments to UFMCC, £45 on advertising in G-Scene, and then about £15 on guest speakers, events, blah, blah, blah. That's how we do it. So if you give by standing order, thank you, thank you, thank you, because it makes such a difference to be able to plan ahead. It makes a huge difference. without the folks who give by standing order, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. Pride wouldn't have an MCC serving accessibility. We wouldn't be able to host Peter Tatchell, answer the pastoral calls that we get for help every week from all around the world, by the way, I hasten to add, or help those in distress, or have a Christian presence in G-Scene, or help the Community Safety Forum, or take funerals and weddings free of charge for those in need. And if you don't give by standing order, then consider it, even if it's just a small amount, because I guarantee that here will make your money work much harder than anywhere else. Every penny makes a real difference, and every penny helps us to plan. Now, last month, Will put together an amazing music month. Thank you so much, Will. And worked so hard and gave so much time and energy just to those worship services for that 1 month. Reverend Peter was on Latest TV last week. Has it been broadcast yet?
Not as far as I know.
No, I've not seen. We've been looking for it and taping it, but we've not seen it yet. So, but on Latest TV, I'm looking forward to that.
I'm sure you'll let me know.
Yeah, and has been asked to write a regular article in one of Brighton's magazines. Recently, we kept a very vulnerable young man in accommodation while his benefit was sorted out. We helped someone on a 0 hours contract buy food. We've dealt recently with 8 pastoral calls for help, made a community hospital visit, and done much, 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 much more. Imagine what we could do if Will and Peter and I didn't have to work 2, 3, sometimes 4 jobs to kind of make ends meet. It would just be extraordinary. Now, and usually when I talk about stewardship, I talk about tithing, but of course you've noticed that this year I'm not. Because I think we know that every major religion in the world encourages or stipulates some kind of planned giving. You know, for many Christians or Jews or Sikhs, etc., it's about 10%. And giving is one of the sacred pillars of Islam. And I think theirs is much more sensible. Theirs is 2.5%, and that's the contribution that they make every month to the needy, and then they make a contribution to the mosque. At the church, we give 10% of everything that we receive, which was the £80 I quoted earlier, to MCC in assessments. And as a church, I think it's probably the most important money that we spend, because without MCC, then we wouldn't be able to work in some of the poorest regions in the world. You know, right now, I guarantee there's a young priest who's leaving the Catholic Church in Latin America to start an MCC, and you didn't realize it, but it's funded by you. A young trans woman in the slums of Madras sees a glimmer of hope, and is setting up a home because of Reverend Pat, the Global Institute, Justice Institute, which is funded by you. An elderly gay couple in Moscow are awaiting papers to start a new life somewhere a lot safer than Chechnya, because of you. An underground LGBT church is meeting in Egypt right now, and Uganda, and a dozen other places that I can't remember. I know of the Egypt and Uganda because I've been in touch with them. And these are places where it's incredibly dangerous to be gay, and they receive their support because it's funded by you, by us here. That's the difference that you make. And all around the world, people are learning that God loves them, regardless of sexuality or gender expression, and that makes a huge difference. You know, God knows I only have to look at my own life to know how important that is. And of course, you know about giving, you know the whole cast your bread upon the water and why it's important. But even if you don't believe in the flow of universal grace and being a part of it, then believe in the difference that the church makes in the community and through MCC around the world. I can't think of anywhere you get a better bang for your buck. And I'm hoping that's a hunting metaphor and not going to get me into some kind of trouble. We are the hands and feet of Christ. If you open your heart to the flow of love and life that we call Christ, then that flow of love and life enters the world through you. Of course, you're blessed by that. It doesn't take away life's problems or mean that you'll win the lottery yet. But you will make a huge difference in the world. And I think quite often you don't know what a difference that you make. I remember a couple of years ago, I was at a conference and we'd sent a check to a group in Poland. And they had managed to send somebody to conference. And I happened to mention which church I came from. And they came over and jumped all over me and said, isn't this wonderful? Thank you so much for being here. You're the church that's responsible for our group meeting. You're the one that funds us. And I'm like, we hardly send anything. But the small amount that we sent was a huge amount to them and enabled them to do work that would have cost 20 times as much in the UK. So even the small amounts that are given here make an enormous difference around the world. I think in Troy's first sermon, he laid the foundation for MCC when he preached about Christian salvation, Christian community, and Christian social action. And almost half a century later, I believe that his words still ring true. And I pray that they are and remain at the heart of who we are and what we do here at the Village MCC. Amen.